Let's return to the cost of capital for Baker Corporation, and we'll start by looking at the cost of this first source of capital, the cost of debt. Our cost of debt is measured by an interest rate or yield that's paid to bondholders or to the bank. Now, if we have a bond that is selling for $1,000 and paying $100 of annual interest, that's a 10% yield. If we have a bond that is trading at a value other than the $1,000 par value, then the calculation of yield gets a little more difficult. So the first thing to point out, I guess, is that this $1,000 example is when the price is $1,000, and that's also equal to the par value of the bond. But if we're trading at a discount or a premium, in other words, if the price of the bond has risen or fallen from $1,000, risen from $1,000 or fallen from $1,000, then in that scenario the calculation is more difficult. What we're really interested in finding with this, when we're doing this calculation, is to determine what the cost of issuing additional debt would be. So if a bond that has a par value of $1,000 and has a stated interest rate of 10%, if the bond is selling for much more than the $1,000 price, that suggests that 10% is a very attractive yield. People are willing to pay more to get that $100 every month there, and if we were to issue additional debt, we wouldn't have to pay 10%. So when we start looking at the cost of new debt, we're really interested in something else that we'll refer to as yield to maturity, and we can approximate yield to maturity with this equation that's in the textbook. This yield to maturity, we designate a little y, I guess that's a y prime, and let's look at what goes into this yield to maturity. Well, one of the things that goes into it is the annual interest payment. That would have been $100 in the previous example. The price of the bond, which is whatever the bond's selling for currently, the principal payment, which is typically $1,000. So the price of the bond might be $1,000. It might be something other than $1,000. The number of years until the bond matures, and then those same terms are the principal is in the denominator, the price of the bond also in the denominator. So let me clean all that up. We see where those items come from. And for this particular bond, we're assuming that the annual interest payment is $101.50. The principal amount of the bond is $1,000. The bond's currently only selling for $940, and there are 20 years left until maturity. Down below, a 0.6, a 0.4 weighted, and we have a $940 again, the price of the bond, which we'd used earlier, and the $1,000 principal amount. The 60%, 40% is just a weighting mechanism, and it's worth noting that this is not exact, as it says at the top, approximate. There are more exact ways to find this using a financial calculator, and you may very well see that at a later time. If we plug all these numbers in and do the math, we come to a value of 10.84%, which is the yield to maturity. Having said that, we have to adjust for taxes. It turns out that the amount that we just looked at is a before-tax cost, but we're quite fortunate. Interest payments are tax deductible, and so the true cost of issuing debt is less than the before-tax cost. Now, the fact that debt is tax deductible essentially means that the government is providing a subsidy for using debt to finance the firm. So through government, due to government preferences, companies take on more debt than they otherwise would. I mean, it may not be explicit, but the government is encouraging people to take on more debt, encouraging businesses to use more debt financing and less equity financing. So in the situation we've just looked at, our cost of debt, which we describe as KD, okay, the cost of debt is equal to the yield, and I don't really like the way this is stated. This Y is not Y times yield. This is just one term. The yield is multiplied by 1 minus the tax rate. If the tax rate's 35%, then this is 1 minus 0.35. So in the instance we just looked at, we'll look here at the very bottom, the yield before tax was 10.84. That's what we found for the approximate yield of maturity. The tax rate is 0.35, and that when we do the calculations, we find that the after-tax cost of debt is 7.05%. Now, if we go back to the beginning here, our after-tax cost of debt, KD, is 7.05%, and we take that and multiply it by the weight. 30% of our capital structure is debt, and then we get a weighted cost of issuing debt.